All right, y'all. You're Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we are talking about the Falcons' thrilling Friday night victory over the Detroit Lions. Talk about which players helped or hurt their chances of making the roster, as well as starting things off with a serious conversation about the Falcons' quarterback situation.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans. And, of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And, of course, today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. So again, thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. We're free and available Monday through Friday in a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. If you subscribe to Locked On Falcons in YouTube, hit that like, hit that bell. You will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So let's start today's conversation having a serious conversation about the Falcons quarterback. And I know a lot of you guys are going to listen to today's episode, and we're going to start off with a mini rant. Maybe we'll go too deep. You're going to hear negativity. It's going to sound like negativity to you guys. And I sit here and I say, what I'm actually being is like, I think there should be positivity surrounding this team. That positivity is entirely wrapped up on Desmond Ridder and his performance on Friday night. He wasn't perfect by any means, but he showed some things. He was able to persevere with third string talent around him, use his legs, create some off structure throws, including that game winner to Jared Bernhardt. And one of the things we talked about with Desmond Ridder was that like winning off structure was not his strength at Cincinnati. And now we saw flashes of that. And it's like, okay, like maybe this guy has something here. Right. And like that should be what we're talking about. That's where our positivity should lie. I don't get why people are talking about Marcus Mariota. He's a bridge quarterback. He's a sacrificial lamb to this guy behind me. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm pointing to the poster of Aaron Donald behind me. You know, like everything that we talk about with this Falcons football team is about finding that quarterback, because I know you cannot succeed in this league if you do not have a quarterback. And I think basically what we saw on Friday night was Desmond Ridder increased those odds that maybe we got a quarterback. And that should be where our positivity lies, right? We've talked about it for months on this podcast, right? When you look at a day two quarterback like Desmond Ridder, the odds tell you look at the last 20 years of drafts, that it's like a 20% chance that you hit on that quarterback. That guy turns into a good quarterback, a winning quarterback, top 15, whatever you want to call it, type of quarterback. And I think what we saw on Friday night was those odds went up. Now, maybe they only went up to 25%. Hell, maybe they went up to 30% if you're feeling especially positive about Friday night's performance. But that should be the focus of the conversation, even if you're not sold on Desmond Ridder, right? And you're sitting here pining for CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever that young future phenom quarterback that's going to be our version of Joe Burrow, our version of Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert. Guess what, guys? Chances of that guy hitting still is like 40% best case scenario, right? So the odds are stacked against this Falcon team from finding that sort of franchise quarterback that's going to lead this team to the promised land, right? This is why I sit here for the last 6 weeks or whatever, obsessed with Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. Because as I explained before, if you don't have a top 10 quarterback, if you don't have a Justin Herbert, if you don't have a Patrick Mahomes, you don't have a Joe Burrow, right? The only teams that we've seen in recent years succeed not having that caliber of quarterback, 2017 Eagles, the 2019 49ers. Guess what those teams had? They had elite pass rushes, right? Because what you need to do if you don't have that type of quarterback, you need to bring the Tom Brady down to Nick Foles' level. You need to bring Patrick Mahomes down to Jimmy G's level. And the only way you can do that is by getting that pass rush and quote unquote changing the culture. Wink, wink. And so I talk about this, this is serious conversation. This podcast is for serious Falcon fans. And when I say serious, I don't mean real or fake or whatever nonsense, people are talking about, you're fake Falcon fans for rooting for the Colts or whatever. I don't care. Right? I'm talking about serious people that get what's going on with this team, that aren't sitting in the room blowing smoke up each other's butts, telling themselves that, Marcus Mariota or anything else is going to be more than this sort of bridge quarterback sacrificial lamb. Hey man, I'm not king shaming. If you want to blow smoke up each other's butts about this team and its future and Marcus Mariota and all this stuff, then hey man, do. I'm not into it, but like I'm not going to waste your time blowing that smoke up your butt. Right? It's the same people that last year were sitting here blowing smoke up your butt about, Arthur Smith bringing about the Matt Ryan Renaissance. That Dean Pease was going to fix all the defense. And then we got 2 weeks into the season. And what were those same people sitting here saying? Well, you can't expect, Rome wasn't built in a day. You got to be patient or whatever the case may be. You're doing it again. This is why I sit here and I get fired up about it, because you basically have the same people recycling the same takes over and over again. And like, no one ever calls them out. Can we be serious about this? So the same people that for 4 years were sitting here saying every time we hired a new defensive coordinator, it's like, this guy's going to fix our defense. Like, no, he's not. Until the Falcons can rush the quarterback, like this defense isn't going anywhere. Right. So I know to a lot of you guys, I'm preaching to the choir. I know a lot of you guys, you're daily listeners of this podcast. You're already serious people, fellow men, women, non-binary people of sincerity. So I apologize. If this just sounds like me ranting, but like I just don't care about Marcus Mariota. I know I'm going to get labeled as a Mariota hater. I just don't get why anybody cares about Marcus Mariota. He's a bridge quarterback, right? This guy's going to murder him. I'm pointing to Aaron Donald, and if he doesn't do it, then Myles Garrett's going to do it. And Nick Bosa, the Bosa boys are coming. Like what are we doing? He's a sacrificial lamb. I mean, like that was the thing on Friday night. Like you look at the good that Desmond Ridder did, all right? All the good that he did, and the bad came when he was pressured, when he was throwing those almost interceptions with pressure. Gasp. A young quarterback struggling to handle pressure? Who would have possibly thought? This is why it spent this last 6 months being like, hey, are we going to fix the offensive line? And that's why, like, 4 weeks ago, a listener asked me, how do we stabilize the quarterback situation? I sat here and I said, fix the offensive line first, and suddenly, quarterbacks will have an environment where they can prosper. That's what serious Falcon fans are talking about. I'm not talking about Marcus Mariota. Like, we're running through the woods, guys. Right? It's you, me, Desmond Ridder, Marcus Mariota. You and me, being serious Falcon fans, look at each other. We give the look. Like, the nod. You know what the nod means? Trip Marcus Mariota. Let the Wolves tear him apart, and let's usher Desmond Ridder to safety. Let's find out if Desmond Ridder's a guy. That's what we need to find out, guys. That's what the season's all about. It's all about checking boxes. Right? We know we have 3 good starters on offense, 2 good starters on defense, and 2 of those starters, Jake Matthews and Grady Jarrett, are basically 30. So really, we only have 3 that we can build around long term, right? Because we're going to have to replace Grady Jarrett and Jake Matthews within 2 years, right? And then the rest of the season is about checking boxes. Does Desmond Ridder check a box? Does Tyler Algier, Drake London, Brian Edwards, Drew Dalman, right? Jalen Hawkins, Richie Grant, Isaiah Oliver, Troy Anderson, right? Arnold Ebiketie, etc. That's all the season's about. That's what serious Falcon fans get. Not sitting here blowing smoke up your butt, trying to sit here and convince you that, oh, we're going to do things with Marcus. Like, no, he is a sacrificial lamb, guys. Let the Wolves tear him apart. The Wolves, right? Why do you think this poster's up here? Yeah, Pitt legend, right? Pitt guy. But like, I want you to watch this podcast, reminded every single day, this guy's coming. And the only thing stopping him is Elijah Wilkinson, right? We're going to find out. Serious Falcon fans get it. We're going to find out next week on Monday night against the Jets, man. Every summer, we see this offensive line get torn apart by some team, right? We saw it in 2019 by the Jets. Quinnen Williams is coming, right? That's just a prelude to what this guy's going to do, man. Right? And so, like, serious Falcon fans, like, I'm not going to sit here and gas you up and be like, oh, man, this offense is cooking against a bottom 5 team. Like, the Lions going to have a top 5 pick next year. Like, okay. Like, they do it against the Jets. Okay. Now we can start being like, oh, maybe there is something to this football team. But the Jets got 3rd string defensive linemen that would be starters here in Atlanta, guys. 3rd stringers. They're going to have guys in the 4th quarter that could come to Atlanta tomorrow and start on this football team. So, it's gonna be a long Monday night. That's all I'm sitting here to tell you. So hopefully they come through it. Hopefully I'm sitting here eating crow and be like, oh, this, Elijah Wilkinson and Caleb McGarry did a good job against Quinnen Williams and all the other guys that the Jets have. Hopefully, but I wouldn't hold my breath. So I could go on and on about this rant. I'm just sitting here saying, like, this season's really about, hopefully by the end of the year, whether it's 20, 25, 30, 35%, that Desmond Ridder has a chance of being a success in this league. That's really what the season's all about. That's the only thing I care about. I don't care about Marcus Mariota. Like, we just got to find out if Desmond Ridder's a guy, and if he's not, then guess what? We got to go get a guy. That's what this is about. We're a rebuilding football team, right? We got to build up this roster so that maybe in the future we get a top 5 running game, we get a top 5 offensive line, top 5 defense, and then maybe we could have a guy like Marcus Mariota be good on this team. Maybe that's Desmond Ridder, maybe that's somebody else. But that's what serious Falcon fans are thinking about. That's what I'm thinking about. So I had to get that off my chest, guys. We'll continue today's episode talking about which players on offense and defense helped their chances of making the roster, because that's really what the preseason is about, is making that roster. But before we get there, guys, I want to tell you about our proud sponsor called BetterHelp. And I just recently signed up with BetterHelp. I had my first session with a licensed therapist last week. And it's probably why I feel compelled to get some things off my chest on today's episode, much more open. And, the great thing about BetterHelp is they can assess your needs, match you with your own licensed professional therapist within 48 hours of signing up. I know one of the things that was important to me was having a therapist that was a person of color, so I wouldn't necessarily have that wall up when talking to that person, and BetterHelp makes that easy. BetterHelp is not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log on anytime, send a message to your therapist. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. It's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. I know that was a big sticking point for me, avoiding therapy and being hesitant to try therapy. But now BetterHelp is allowing me to think about it as a more affordable investment in myself. So if you're looking to make a similar investment, head to the website, take advantage of this special offer by getting 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. So, guys, let's talk about, players that move the needle, right? As I say, preseason's about finding the 53 guys that make the team. It's not really about predicting the season. Now, if Elijah Wilkinson actually stops Quinnen Williams next week, then maybe that's predictive to the season, because it's like, oh, this guy might not murder him. I mean, he's going to die, but he'll bleed out slowly over the course of 4 quarters, right? So we'll see. Now, I know some of you guys are like, Aaron, you're saying all this stuff and you saying crazy things on Twitter on Friday night and Saturday and whatnot. And it's like, you guys got to get it. I know some of you guys get it, but not everybody gets it. But, 90% of the stuff I say on Twitter is snark and sarcasm. Only 10% of it's real, right? Now, I'll give you a hint on, the 10% that's real, right? It's the game, right? That's the game when you follow me on Twitter at Falcons, is finding out what 10% is he being serious about. Like, he being serious about that? But I'll give you a hint. The 10% that's real is when I'm talking about Matt Schaub or James Stone, right? And some of you are like, wait, is that real? I'm like, that's the game, guys, right? So let's talk about the offense, right? Let's talk about the offensive line, right? And, Elijah Wilkinson, Caleb McGarry, fine. The left guard, right tackle position, nothing really changed from the status quo, where it looks like Wilkinson and Caleb McGarry are going to be the starters week 1. Again, we might be having a very different conversation after next week, but we'll see how that goes. The big topic conversation was the center position, Drew Dalman and Matt Hennessy. Now, if you checked out the Locked On Sports Atlanta postcast on Friday night with myself and Jarvis Davis, I sort of said on that episode that, I thought going into the game, Drew Dalman was the front runner. I thought Matt Hennessy getting the start, maybe he had closed the gap in large part due to the starting offensive line's ability to move the ball down the field, and the backups with Drew Dalman were, less effective, less consistent in that regard. But rewatching the game, I did think Drew Dalman was better than Matt Hennessy. I thought he was a much more physical player at the point of attack. This has been my main criticism, or I guess point, between Drew Dalman and Matt Hennessy. Very similar players. Hennessy's a bigger guy, but he's much more of a finesse guy. I think Dalman, despite his lack of size, plays with a much more physicality at the point of attack. I think that was reflected in the game. But it's hard to make that comparison with this battle, because it's not an apples to apples comparison, because Matt Hennessy got 1 series against the starter. And so the fact that he wasn't necessarily, blowing guys off the ball, is that due to the quality of competition he was facing? And the fact that Drew Dalman was it because he was facing second and third stringers contributing that? So again, I think next week we'll have a better idea on the center position. I don't, know if anybody really created separation. Again, I still lean Dalman as the better option of the two at this point in time, but we'll sort of have to see how that goes. And I think next week will go a long way to determining that. I think obviously the other point for the offense from Monday's not or not from Friday. We'll find out probably as most of you guys are listening to this. I'm recording this early Sunday morning, so we haven't gotten an update on Drake London's status and his injury. I'm not expecting it to be serious. It doesn't sound like it's serious. I think he's probably still on track to play week 1. Hopefully, Arthur Smith will give us an update on that. But Arthur Smith, he ain't gonna tell us anything. So we'll just see how that goes. But obviously, if we get a major change to that on Sunday or Monday, I'll give you the update on that. So I think he did fine for the 2 snaps he played. Or I think he played 5 snaps and ran routes on 2 snaps. But anyway, the other notable thing about the offense for me at the wide receiver position was, it was notable the player that started opposite Drake London in this game was Kadero Hodge. And this goes back to something you've heard me talk about for the last 3 months, which is like when you're projecting your roster, you got to put Kadero Hodge on the roster. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a lock to make the roster, but like he's as good a bet as, after Drake London, after OZ, after Brian Edwards. Kadero Hodge is the guy that has the 4th best odds of making this roster. And I think that was reflected on Friday from the fact that he was, starting the game. The fact that Auden Tate, a guy who a lot of people have been high on. I'm a big fan of Auden Tate as a player, but I've been saying for the last 3 months since mid-May that he's on the outside looking in. And I think that was reflected on Friday night because he was basically like the 6th wide receiver. He was the 3rd string X wide receiver behind Geronimo Allison, who came in the game when Drake London got hurt at that X wide receiver spot. So again, I don't think Auden Tate is going to make the roster, but certainly him, Geronimo Allison, some Jared Bernhardt, some of these guys showed the ability that certainly they should be in the mix for the practice squad. The other big takeaway I had from the offense was, Parker Hesse. And we talked about this when we signed Michael Pruitt last week, which was, the idea that Michael Pruitt signing was a shot across the bow of Parker Hesse and John Fitzpatrick. But to me, what was notable was that Parker Hesse started a game at the fullback position, and then was playing with the 1s and 2s at the tight end position. Meanwhile, John Fitzpatrick, I was about to call him John Parker Wilson. John Fitzpatrick was the 7th string tight end. Right, he came on the field after Tucker Fisk, after Felipe Franks, and those guys, and so that makes me think that John Fitzpatrick is probably the least safe. But him being that low on the depth chart probably is a reflection of the fact that he, was coming off of those foot injuries, and that sort of limited him in OTAs and probably limited him in the early part of training camp. So, his reflection when we look at these depth charts, and I posted the actual depth chart on my Twitter. If you want to go to there, after you play the game, of like what he's serious. So part of that 10% that I am being serious is, the depth chart. I posted on a Google Doc. You can find a link to that pinned to my Twitter profile of what the actual depth chart looked like on offense, defense, and special teams from Friday night. And I plan to update that as the rest of the preseason goes, because that's going to help us indicate, who's going to make the roster. But, the fact that John Fitzpatrick was so low on the depth chart, does not necessarily bode well for him making the team. But it also could be just because he got minimal amount of workload this offseason. And so the depth chart may reflect that, is sort of the point I'm trying to make, is like the guys that were buried on the depth chart maybe a sign of guys that didn't get as much work in the OTAs and all that stuff, and so are behind the curve. So we'll see if John Fitzpatrick can sort of close the gap there. But if I'm sitting here projecting 4 tight ends to make the roster today, I think it's going to be Pitts, Ferkser, Parker Hesse, and Michael Pruitt. So we'll see how that goes. The other takeaway from the game, at the running back position, it was notable to me that Tyler Algier was the 5th string running back. But my guess is that the Falcons wanted to get him a lot of reps with the 2nd and 3rd stringers in the second half of the game. So I wouldn't look at that as a reflection of he's behind the 8 ball. But it does seem to indicate that, maybe he's not the front runner to be the RB2 as we thought, but we'll see. I think the good takeaway from the game with the running back position, whether it was Tyler Algier, whether it was Caleb Huntley, whether it was Quadri Olison, especially Olison and Algier, was that they made some good blocks and pass protection, right? Algier had the big block to pick up the blitz on the final play, or not the final play, but the game-winning play that Desmond Ridder threw that touchdown that allowed him to get out the pocket. And that was one of the things that was a weakness of Algier, in my opinion, at BYU, that despite his physical disposition, that physicality kind of went away as a pass protector, and he kind of struggled in that arena. So it's nice to see him step up in that way. I thought Allison had a couple of nice blitz pickups early in the game when he was working with the ones in the twos. And that was always been a weakness of Allison, that he's kind of struggled in pass protection. That's been a big reason why he has not played a ton. We talked about that with, I think, Will McFadden last week. So those were good positive signs. So those are things that I'm looking at, and I'm looking to see if those things continue as the weeks come by. Again, it'll be an interesting challenge against the Jets next week, given my expectations there, but we'll sort of have to see. We'll flip the script, talk about, the defensive players that stood out on Friday night, and the guys that kind of helped themselves make the roster. We didn't see quite what we wanted to see from the starters, but I don't know if we need to draw too many new conclusions, let's say that, from that moving forward. So we'll get into that as we continue and wrap up today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But before we get there, speaking of the Jets game, the lines for next Monday night's action against the Jets has yet to come out. But I'll give you that update when they do. But we're talking about this guy behind me, right? The Falcons are 13-point underdogs against the Rams in week 2. That's the biggest spread over the first month of the regular season. And so maybe you're sitting here being like, hey, I'm a serious Falcon fan. I'm going to put some serious money on that game, either for the Falcons to cover or for the Rams to cover, whatever the case may be. Go to betonline.net. That's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events for the number one source for all your odds, lines, and games. Find reviews, news of every league, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online source for all your sports wagering info, from live in-game betting, scores, podcasts. They have you covered. Head to betonline.net today. Use your mobile device to sign up. Learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's talk about the defense. Let's talk about the starters. They kind of got pushed around by the Lions. We know the Lions have a good offensive line. They pushed them around in week 16. Nothing changed. I mean, that's kind of my takeaway. And, what podcast has been talking about the Falcons needing to upgrade their D-line for months now. I wonder what podcast that was. It'll come to me at some point in time. But, we saw that the Lions control the line of scrimmage in week 16 last year. The Falcons basically running it back with the same D-line. So the fact that the Lions were able to control the line of scrimmage on Friday night, at least for that one series where the starters were out there, should not be a surprise. That's what I mean, where nothing new we learned about this football team. And so, I'll sit here and continue to think that they need to add more D-line help if they want to upgrade that unit. It was a lot of Grady Jarrett. It was a lot of Anthony Rush playing, their 2-4 nickel on that opening series, and they got pushed around. So we'll see how that goes. I did think some of the depth guys did step up. We're talking about this team keeping 6 D linemen. We know 4 of those guys: Grady Jarrett, Anthony Rush, Taquan Graham, and Marlon Davidson. The question is, are the other 2 currently on this team, or are they guys that pick up? Again, I still think that if this team is a serious franchise, which is what we're talking about today, they'll at least add one more body to this unit, some proven option there. But I did think Timmy Horn, Nick Thurman, and Jalen Dalton, who were the second team D-line, did do some nice work there. So we'll see if Terry can be serious and add more depth there, or they continue to let these guys develop, which is not a surprise. Again, I'm not going to sit here and be upset that they haven't signed someone tomorrow or anything like that. Give these guys opportunities to see what they have. And then when we get to final cuts, when, we get to August 30th and September 1st, then you can make some of those moves when players are available. See what's available out there. So willing to be patient there. Edge rush, Arnold Ebiketie flashed some things. That's kind of the main takeaway from the edge rush. Wasn't anything to write home about. Nothing really moved the needle from that standpoint. I did think several of the backup linebackers did play well. Rashaan Evans made a number of plays with the starters. Michael Walker was okay. But I thought Nate Landman and Dorian Etheridge flashed, right? I thought it was notable that Etheridge was kind of the starter on the special teams coverage, which again, if we're talking about making the roster, you're gonna have to play special teams. So I would say here and say that if the Falcons are going to keep a 5th linebacker, beyond, Evans, Walker, Nick Kwiatkowski, Troy Anderson. I don't think it's going to be Deion Jones, as I've said many times before. If they do wind up keeping the fifth off-ball linebacker, I would put here and say Etheridge, because of his special teams value, is the guy to pick. But I thought Nate Landman played well on defense, better than him on defense. And so one of the things you want to keep an eye on to see if Nate Landman's really increasing his odds of making the roster versus just being a practice squad guy, if we start seeing him on those punt coverage units on a regular basis for the upcoming 2 preseason games. So that's something to keep an eye on. At the cornerback position, I thought D. Alford obviously was the guy that shined, had that interception. We saw Mike Ford get most of the nickel snaps in the slot in the first half of the game, and D. Alford got the majority of them in the second half of the game. D. Alford's one interception came from him working in the nickel. Again, I think in terms of making the roster, I already had D. Alford as one of the 6 cornerbacks making the roster, but Mike Ford did not play well, but I don't think his roster spot is in jeopardy because he's here to play special teams. So we'll see how that goes. But to me, the real battle at the cornerback position, I think I discussed this like a week or two ago on the pod, was that it's Darren Hall versus D. Alford, and if you're going to be a backup corner on this team, after the top 3, Hayward, Terrell, and Oliver, you're going to have to show the flexibility to play inside or outside, because again, in the event of an injury in the game, you might have to be inserted in the nickel, you might be inserted on the outside. And so we saw Darren Hall play nickel last year, so I expect the Falcons to play him primarily as an outside corner this summer to sort of see if he can hold those spots, and obviously getting forward and Alford some opportunities as nickel in the event, that's where they have to prove themselves, because Alford was an outside corner in the CFL and was very good at that. So those are some battles that we'll keep an eye on moving forward. But I think probably on game days we'll have 5 active corners. 4 of those guys will be Oliver, Terrell, Hayward, and then Mike Ford again, because of the special teams value, not the defensive value. And it's really a competition between Darren Hall and D. Alford to be that 5th guy that's going to be active on game day. And whoever, loses that battle will probably be inactive most weeks. We saw that last year with Darren Hall starting out the season, the first 4 or 5 games until Oliver's injury, was inactive in those games. Safety, not too much to glean from Richie Grant's performance. Jalen Hawkins did not play. And for those of you wondering, why didn't this play? Brian Edwards, Troy Anderson, Nick Kwiatkowski, Arthur Smith said that he was going to play. If they were healthy enough to play, they're going to play. So if you saw a player did not play, the easy assumption, and in some of those guys' cases, like we didn't know about Nick Kwiatkowski or Troy Anderson's injury, but it's easy to assume that those guys weren't healthy enough to play. So that's why they sat them. So nothing to really glean from Richie Grant's performance that makes us feel great about him moving forward. Again, not to say that you should feel bad about him. We just hard to tell off of one series where the Falcons were getting gashed. I did think among the safety group that the one guy that did stand out to me was Teatabor. I think he helped his chances of making this roster as a 5th safety. Certainly a front runner to be the practice squad guy. I thought he did a really good job in run support, also contributed on special teams as well. So those are some of the big takeaways I had from Friday night's performance. Obviously, we'll keep an eye on things. We'll hopefully get an update on Drake London. We'll get an update on some of these other guys. We'll see some of these guys next week against the Jets, and hopefully the Falcons, will be serious and not get destroyed. But at least the offensive line. Again, I expect the rest of the team to do fine against the Jets, but the offensive line doesn't look pretty. But we'll see how that unfolds, guys. Not here to kink shame you if you want to, get in a room and blow smoke up each other's butts, but we're not going to do that here on Locked On Falcons. We're a serious podcast. This is for men and women and non-binary people of sincerity. So we'll just see how that unfolds, guys, and hopefully Desmond Ridder will survive next week against the Jets and continue to show us things that, hey, this guy can be a player. And if you want to be optimistic about that team, to me, that's where that's the foundation of your optimism moving forward, not some nonsense about Marcus Mariota or whoever. So that's it, guys. Done talking about this. We'll be back tomorrow. Probably have some guests on later this week to talk more things Falcons, get their thoughts on the first preseason action as well. So that will do it for us here, guys. Appreciate it. Till then.